Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Ugo Bardi. I'm speaking to you from Florence, Italy, and I would like to present to you a new version of a talk that I gave just yesterday. Yesterday, it was September 19th of 2024, and I was speaking virtually at this meeting that held in Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan. And this talk was part of a session called Embracing Nature's Complexity, which was, I think, very interesting. With some people speaking, several people speaking about the homeostasis of the system, sustainability, the role of forest, the climate, many things. So very, very interesting. And I gave my modest contribution, which I would like to present to you again today. So let me move to the next, my first slide actually. First slide, I was concentrating on the concept of Earth's metabolism. Metabolism. What is metabolism? Metabolism is energy, the energy that a living being consumes. We are alive because we have a metabolism. We absorb energy, we process it inside our body, and then we dissipate it in the form of heat, and we're living alive. The earth does the same. And we are part of the earth, so the earth is alive, and we are alive because the earth is alive. So, what do we mean as a metabolism? You can also see it in this way. You see, this image shows the earth as existing precariously, held at a certain state of energy consumption, metabolic energy on the um, y-axis. You have something like metabolic energy, and you see it's unstable equilibrium. This is unstable because every living being is in an unstable situation. We are, as long as we are alive, we are happy because we are alive, but being alive is unstable. In some conditions, we die because we need some specific conditions around us. We need food, we need a certain temperature, we need oxygen to breathe, and that's what makes the life of a living being a little precarious, and Earth too is a little precarious in its terms of its regulation. It is kept where it is alive, as a tool, because of certain internal cycles with continuous balance control the exchange of energy from the sun dissipated then into space. And the main cycles, the main processes which create this stability, this homeostasis of the earth, you can recognize them actually if you know a little chemistry. The first reaction here, you recognize it is photosynthesis. H means solar luminosity, which provides the energy needed to break down the carbon dioxide molecules, turn them into glucose, or in general in carbon solid macromolecules which make our body. And that's the photosynthesis process. It is made inside plants and provides this. Every one of us is made of carbon atoms, which were made by plants, and even before the CO2, which was turned into us by plants, was outgassed by the depth of the earth, because the earth continuously provides CO2 into the atmosphere. Otherwise, it would disappear in a few 100,000 years. The other reaction, if it has to be a cycle, it has to return. The products of the reaction have to be turned into reactants of another reaction, and the cycle goes on. And below you see the reaction of respiration. Respiration is exactly this. It is how oxygen, that we breathe oxygen, we consume organic molecules, mainly glucose, but not just that, turning it back into carbon dioxide and water. And energy in this case is in the form of the molecules called ATP, which provide the energy for everything which goes on inside of our body, which is a very complicated story, but everything is correlated. The system is incredibly complex, but the basic elements are not so impossible to understand. So let's move on. A point that I would like to note here is that all this metabolic thing that we are working on, we work on the basis of it, can exist because there are three main gases in the Earth's atmosphere. And people have noted long before that there is much more oxygen than CO2. CO2 is very small. People often say, well, with such a small concentration of CO2, why is people so worried about CO2? 0.04%. It's nothing. And so why should it change the Earth's temperature? It's completely wrong. So wrong, incredibly wrong. Small amounts of things can make enormous changes in complex systems. In a sense, you can remember the butterfly effect. A butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil, and it causes a hurricane in New York. But it's a basic chemistry concept. It is called catalysis. Catalysts are usually very small amounts of something, and they can cause enormous changes. Without CO2, nothing on this planet would be alive. And 0.4% is already it's enough in a sense, but it may not. You may ask why so little? Why not more than that? If CO2 is necessary, why so little? And the same for oxygen. If it is necessary, why do we have this value? And uh, neglecting for now the H2O, which is another story, I would like to think and maybe to convince you that these concentrations are not random, are not casual, are the result of the equilibrium, the homeostasis of the system, which is adapted for these concentrations because it is an evolutionary process which leads the system exactly to that. Let me explain to you. Let's consider first oxygen, and we take the long view over the whole Phanerozoic eon, which is 565 million years of span. And at the beginning, oxygen was very low. There were no animals, no vascular plants. If you like to call animals, also the single-celled creatures, you can call them animal if they are zooplankton. But we are metazoa. Metazoa means multicellular creatures, so complicated, or entities which stumble around on Earth. So little oxygen, there was no animals, no metazoa. Then at some point, around 400 million years ago, a little later, oxygen starts appear in relatively large amounts, and animals, metazoa, appear. The two things are not one is not causal with the other. You have to be careful about that. In complex systems, there is no cause and effect. There is interaction. There is always feedback. So oxygen creates larger animals, multicellular animals change the parameters of the system and generate more oxygen. Is a long story, but that's what we see. I just wanted to show you the oxygen concentration as being more or less constant over this long period of time. We're discussing about something like 400 million years. And why is it so relatively constant? Because there are limits. Essentially, much more complex than this, but as a first approximation, oxygen is kept in check by fires, forest fires. If you have too much oxygen, it will burn things, and so it will be taken down. At least this is what is believed mostly. Probably, I'd say it is true, in my modest opinion. So we may like to have more oxygen because oxygen makes things move faster, but we cannot because things move so fast that everything burns. And notice that oxygen has become a little lower during the past few tens of millions of years ago. There are reasons for that too, but let's not go into that now. Now let's go see the other important gas, carbon dioxide. which is very interesting because it's really, it is the critical point. This molecule does everything in the ecosphere. It is a fantastic story, and now I can present you data which came out of Science just today, just the day after I gave my talk yesterday for the conference in Bishkek. So now I have better, the change has not been so large, but we have better data, more updated. And what you see here, excuse me, there it is. What you see here above is the temperature, and below it is the carbon dioxide concentration. Now, note first thing, the agreement is reasonably good between the two. Not always good. The agreement is shown in this sub image here. There is a clear correspondence with some points which are out of the correlation, because it is what you expect. It will not be perfect. It is a complex system. There are many factors moving, changing, affecting the system, creating feedback. So you do not expect a perfect correlation, and you don't have it. There are some moments in the history of the Earth when the correlation is bad, very simply said, and then some periods when it is good, because there are other factors, forests, outgassing, solar luminosity changes, and other effects. But what I want to note that carbon dioxide here is represented in a logarithmic scale. So the change changes a lot. Whereas oxygen was on a linear scale, carbon dioxide has a huge change, logarithmic scale in absolute terms. And that's a very fundamental point, because the whole idea of climate change is based on this logarithmic correlation between concentrations and temperature, an idea that goes back to the founder of climate science, who was a Swedish chemist named Svante Arrhenius, long ago, late 19th century. And he was right in so many things. Well, anyway, so we have another correlation, and we could say a lot of things in this diagram, but what I want to show you, to have you notice, is how we live in a period, we live at the extreme right of this graph. And we are at the end of a long period of cooling of the Earth, which goes together with a long period of reduction of the CO2 concentration. Really, if you look at the figure well, you see that there has never been such a low concentration of CO2 on this planet ever before now. It's a trend that started way before humans existed. Humans have been existed here for a few million years at best, but this trend has about 50 million years of span. There are reasons for this trend. Could speak about that for a long time, but anyway, for the time being, let's just say that we have been moving along this road for some reasons, which there are reasons. Everything which happens on this planet has reasons to happen. But we found ourselves, we emerged as our ancestors emerged as human beings with the big brain we have about 3 million years ago, even less than that, and in a period in which there was so little CO2. And there are reasons for that. I'll get into that more later. Anyway, what we are doing now, as you all know, if you follow the debate, is that we changed everything. We interrupted the trend, a trend that was lasting for 50 million years, and now, bang, we go up. And then what happens? We're changing things. Okay, the first thing that you know is that, okay, climate change, global warming, extreme events, and floods, and ice cap melting, and all that. But I'm not going to discuss that because it is well known. I would like to notice a few things that CO2 does. Is increase in concentration of CO2 noticeable. We are back to more or less the times of the beginning of the diminishing trend. And what is the effect? The chemical effect, not just temperature effect, but the chemical effects. And one is global greening, because people say, you have noticed, people say, oh, CO2, we have more, it is good, it is food for plants, so plants grow better. They do. It is within some limits, it is true. We think in general this effect would be happening for up to about 600 parts per million. We are now 420. You have an advantage for plants. Then it goes down again. And so we have this greening, which we think is a good thing. Maybe it is. Not sure about that, because everything you change on this planet has reverberation changes in other parts of the system. For instance, you have more forests, you have less desert. Good. Yes, it is good, but it is bad for the seas, because the seas, the life inside sea depends on dust, fertilization by dust, which comes from the deserts. So less deserts, more life on land, less life in the oceans, and so many things. Don't think that you can improve food production with this trick, because you increase the yield of crops, of cultivations in terms of weight, but not in terms of nutritional value. Because what you do, you get more weight, but it's mostly water. Okay, that is nothing is simple in complex systems by definition. And this is one of the effects. Another effect, which is probably bad, but we don't know how bad it is ocean this acidification. You see it on the left. Again, there is a trick on the logarithmic scale. People don't normally understand logarithms, but the acidity of the oceans, since CO2 is an acid, it's measured in terms of something called pH that you probably studied at school. pH is a logarithmic of the concentration of the hydrogen ion. But since it is logarithmic, the change that you see on the scale here, no, here, there, let me move it. It looks small, but it is not small. And when you place this in the idea, in the general scheme of the many risks called tipping points in our world, you see that oceanic acidification is kept within those things as safe limits. Why? Nobody knows. This is politics. This is not science. Nobody knows what is the safe limits. But then people who made this graph decided that it is maybe safe because we don't know. And so it is safe, but it may not be. It's going to have possibly enormous effects on the fauna and the flora of the oceans, but we don't know. And then always another effect. Now, that's the most important, most interesting part that I would like to discuss with you. Because you see, there is water in this planet. Earth, there is a lot of water in the oceans, there is a lot of water in the rivers, there is a lot of water in the lakes, and there is water also inside us. Water, which is in the form, liquid water, in the form of blood. Blood is mainly liquid water with a lot of stuff inside, but it is water. It flows inside your body. And we have blood inside our bodies because we had to solve the problem of how to carry oxygen inside our tissues to the cells which need it. No oxygen, no life. If we were single-celled organisms, no problem. We are very small creatures which just exchange oxygen and CO2 through the membranes. Easy. Now you are a big thing who contains hundreds of millions or billions of cells inside your body. And those which are inside, they starve of oxygen. Oh, wait, we need to breathe. And so you have to use blood circulation to carry oxygen from the air through the lungs to the blood, to the mitochondria there. It's a incredibly complicated story. If you don't see it, you don't know it exists. It exists because we exist. But did evolution create this? Unbelievable, but it did. Such a complicated system, and it works. It works, but it needs a very fine adjustment of parameters. Because one problem is that oxygen is a very reactive gas. It is a poison. You don't want to have it free inside your body. A little, yes, but not too much. You have it in your lungs, but not outside your lungs. So you keep it stuck to a molecule called hemoglobin, and you carry it there to your mitochondria, which need continuously to be fed with oxygen because otherwise they die. Or maybe they decide to switch to anaerobic processing, which is very bad for you because you probably developed a cancer here. You don't want that. So it's all based on this molecule, which is the heme group of the bigger molecules, which is called hemoglobin or hemoglobin, not sure about that. And you see oxygen is stuck to the iron atom in the middle of this ring, stuck there because you don't want to have it around, but you have to release it when you need it. When this molecule is close to a mitochondrion, okay, say, oh, you need the oxygen, please release the oxygen. How does the hemoglobin molecule know that it is time to release the oxygen? Big problem. That's not a problem. They solved by having what they call an allosteric catalytic reaction. nice to say this, right? You have to be a chemistry professor to say that with a straight face. But never mind that. There is a signaling system. The molecule knows when to release oxygen when it reacts with CO2. CO2. We return to carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is the allosteric regulator. Allosteric means the molecule changes shape. And by changing shapes, it changes its affinity to oxygen it releases. It is like a truck or a wheelbarrow. Okay, at some point, say, drop it, drop what you have because we need it here. And it happens in an extremely complicated story, but with the formation of this carbamino, hemoglobin, don't worry about that. The point is that CO2, among the many things it does, it also controls the flow of oxygen inside your body. You need CO2 to tell the hemoglobin when it is time to release oxygen. And there is it leads to some effects that there is a whole school of medicine, typical of the old Soviet Union, said that CO2 is good for you because it controls the oxygen release. It's in some conditions you desperately need CO2 and in large amounts to survive, but normally you need a precise, exact, fine regulation to make this thing work because you vitally need to bring oxygen here. Otherwise, you die, or maybe you become stupid. That's, I think, is happening in the world right now. But let's not go into that. So, the threshold, typical of regulation system have a threshold. Threshold is there, and it is called the Bohr effect, which says just that more CO2 means less oxygen. More oxygen means less CO2. Simple. So you don't want too much CO2 because it will mean less oxygen. A little you need, too much is bad. And as is known, CO2 is a poison. People say it is an inert gas. It is not. It is not. It kills you. Too much CO2 will kill you. But you go to sufficiently large concentrations of about 5% of CO2, you die. But you see this diagram tells you that some concentration are supposed to be safe. But again, really, we don't know because our species evolved at a concentration of about 200, 300, less than 300 parts per billion. No human being on this planet has ever lived a lifetime at 400. Is it good? Is it bad? We don't know. And especially the fundamental point is not so much we have 420 now. Probably it's harmless, but inside your homes, well, nicely sealed because you want to save energy, um, you easily go to 1,000, 2,000. You can make measurements using simple instruments you can buy for $50 on the web. And you will see easily that in your home there may be 500, 600, which is probably okay. When there is a lot of many people in a room, you go 1,200 in a classroom. You can have 2,000 in a theater, but easily 200, 2,000 and more, which is not necessarily bad, but we just don't know. We don't know what the effect will be, especially since we're keeping the concentration of CO2 increasing 3 parts per million every year, more or less, which means that we grow, we go into something that we have no idea what the effect could be. And I would like to now to go to a point that I find very important, which is there is an evolutionary aspect of CO2, and I would like to present to you a hypothesis that the large number of neurons we have in our brains is mainly the result of the low CO2 concentrations in the Pleistocene, which is the period which was preceding the Holocene, in which we live. We had about 180 parts per million, never seen before on Earth. Why? Well, let me show you this graph. This graph shows that it is the ratio of oxygen to CO2. As I told you, the amount of of oxygen didn't change so much over this long span of time, the Phanerozoic. So what you see here is actually the effect of CO2 going up and down. Mainly, this peak here, it's a bit too high. I think it is the peak at 300 million years ago. Is probably an artifact, should be a little lower, but doesn't matter. So when we have a lot of a little CO2 and a lot of oxygen, the ratio is high, then you have evolutionary explosions, new life forms develop and take over the planet. We had an explosion during the 300 during the Permian. During the Permian, we had this Permian fauna, which was not so impressive. These creatures were not as big as dinosaurs, sure, not as smart as human beings, but it was really something way more important than before, anything that had existed before. Then we had the dinosaurs, which were not so smart, maybe, but they're still very advanced life forms. And then you go up in the concentration of CO2, the ratio of oxygen to CO2. And right now, at the extreme right of the diagram, where we had the highest ratio, very little CO2, which means, as you saw, you see the Bohr diagram, means that you can move a lot of oxygen in and out from the air to the body and transfer it to the brain. And then you start having, at the last few million years, some exceedingly encephalized creatures. Humans, the biggest brain ever seen in the history of this planet. Elephants, too. They have a very big brain, but it's organized in a completely different way than ours. We have many neurons in the cortex. Elephants have a huge number of neurons in the cerebellum. We have a cerebellum too. Cerebellum is used to automatic tasks. The cerebellum of elephants is used to move the trunk mainly. It is huge, much larger than anything. The larger cerebellum in the ecosphere. So is it possible? Well, yes, I think there are good reasons to think that this idea is true, because our brain evolved during few million years, and you saw how the curve went up during this period. It went down a little recently, maybe because also the CO concentration went up, brains went down, maybe. But you see, the human brain is very special. And this is the work of Miss Susan Herculano-Rosell. Great work, shows that our brain is really something different. There's little to do with mammalian brains on the whole, because it's not just say it is bigger. It is the cortex is more packed with neurons. We are special in the ecosystem. You see here the humans have, this is in Spanish, but I think you understand that the humans are higher number of neurons in the cortex for the same weight of the brain, which is a special lineage of creatures which developed during the period in which we had this decline of CO2 concentration, and which led eventually to us. I'm not sure we really are the crown of the creation, some people say, but I'm not being parochial or chauvinistic. We have big brains. This much we can say. The way we use our big brains, it's another story, but we do have them. And so that's one point, I think, in favor of my hypothesis. This is this huge brain which consumes 25% of your metabolism in all the time. When you sleep, your brain needs oxygen, needs glucose to work. And with this possible for two things. One, the high concentration of oxygen in the atmosphere, and two, also because we have this small mouth and we can cook. We have a small mouth because we eat high nutritional food that we cook. There's another strange things in this planet, but we are the only species that cooks food. Long story. So anyway, the big problem is that not only it is a story of evolutionary thing of the past million, 10 millions, 100 million years ago. It is now. We can see it. There are several papers which show that if you breathe a low concentration, a high concentration of CO2, your cognitive performance goes down, like this paper. Oh, with attention, because this is an area of science which is growing up. It is appearing right now, the effect of CO2 on your brain. There are many papers. They all say more or less the same thing. CO2 is not so good for your brain, but some say it is very bad. Some say, well, maybe there is some effect. Some don't see much of an effect. But on the whole, I think it is safe to say that the effect is there. No problem. Doesn't mean that if you breathe CO2 at 2000 parts per million, you die. Doesn't mean that you go mad. It doesn't mean that it means a reduction of cognitive performance. If you have a submariner, you live normally at about 5,000 parts per million. But you don't have to. Inside the submarine, you don't have to solve complex problems. You have to do your job and not more. And then people stay in submarines for no more than a few months at most. But then it has been studied that show that their metabolism adapts to high concentrations of CO2. Then it returns when they go back to the surface. They returns to the normal conditions. But it is there, and it is a big problem, because if it is true, we are dumping ourselves. It is called global dumping, or more formally, the reverse Flynn effect. Mr. Flynn found that from the 1960s to the 1990s, there was an increase in the intelligence of people. Maybe because people were eating a better diet, it could be. But then from a certain point up to now, we saw a reverse. Why? People still keep eating probably a good diet. We might discuss that, but still it is possible. And it is thinking, the idea is caused by the environment, some pollution, something polluting. What is it? Not necessarily CO2, but it might be. I would surmise that there are good probabilities that it is, because we know from other measurements that high CO2 concentration affects your brain capability, your intelligence is lowered a little. You are less efficient at tasks involving intelligence. So the situation is not so good, because if we plot the data that I was showing to you before, you see now I plotted also the present situation, and whereas we evolved here we are now here. We are back to 30, 40 million years ago when the CO2 concentration was much higher than it is now. And at that time, there were no human beings. Could human beings have evolved in those conditions? I don't know, but I think it's honestly possible to doubt that humans are the result of a special condition of CO2 concentration which existed only during the Pleistocene, that is only starting a few million years ago, not 40 million years ago. So it is very, 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 very bad, because global dumping is exactly what we don't need now, because we are in trouble for many things. We have to fix this planet. We have to remedy to the damage we ourselves produce to it. And how do we do that? Good point. I hope we find a way, but I think I would close it here after half an hour, more than a half an hour talk, summarizing the roles of CO2, but I am not going to this list reading. You see, there are many things which are additional and perhaps more worrisome than climate force, and in particular, this idea of global dumping, and which I think I would like to thank my sponsors, which are mainly, since I'm retired, I'm not sponsored by my university anymore, but I found good sponsors in the Godeskaya and Dor Ganesha, and I think I close with this, which I think is the main proof we have that global dumping is happening, because you just turn on the TV and you see it ongoing. And thank you very much from Ugo Bardi, and it was a pleasure for me to speak to you, and I hope you appreciated it. Thank you.